Okay, we are back on the record, and what I would like to do is give Mr. Guintivano on the phone an opportunity to say anything if he has anything that he'd like to add on with respect to the workshops.
Yes, Your Honor. Again, Lloyd Guintivano from the County of Lake. The County of Lake is open to participating in the workshops based on the discussions that took place this morning. We believe that PG&E and the other utilities should provide cost information on options submitted by the parties, as well as any previous cost studies on options that the utilities have previously evaluated and considered. We also request that we believe that the option should expand beyond the radio off option identified in PG&E's application, including, and it should include the analog meters option that was raised by the other parties this morning. And in participating in this workshops, we hope that any options that would be discussed between the parties would address the health, privacy, security, and environmental concerns of smart meters. And lastly, we request that telephonic participation be made available in these workshops.
Okay, Mr. Guintivano, one question. I know you mentioned the health, privacy, and safety issues. Are you suggesting that anybody who wishes to opt out has to have a reason to opt out?
Not necessarily. I'm mainly referring to both the scoping memo and the protest document that we filed. The scoping memo makes reference to a first phase in this proceeding, and it narrows down the issues in 3 specific items. And we are open to that. At the same time, we're well aware that any discussion on how reasonable an opt-out provision or a particular opt-out option may depend on certain health, privacy, security, and environmental issues that smart meters may raise for specific individuals who are looking to opt out. And that was raised in our protest document.
Okay, for the utilities, just a quick question. Was there a thought that for an opt-out from the smart meter program, was there a consideration that in order to opt out that a person has to state a reason why they wish to opt out, or can they just say, I wish to opt out?
Well,
wait, I'd like to have the utilities respond, please, and then you can respond after that.
This is Nwmu for PG&E, and for our radio off proposal, any residential customer can opt out for any reason.
Okay.
Or no reason.
Or no reason.
Okay. And Ms. Combs and Mr. Trial, were you, as you're thinking of, I know it's very preliminary for Edison, but are there thoughts that opt-out will only be limited for certain reasons, or is the thought that it may be for no reason, any reason, and that nothing has to be stated?
Again, as you know, Your Honor, it's very...
Could you stand up, please?
Sure. As you've noted, it's very preliminary for us, and we have not had the opportunity to evaluate all the technical issues that may come up with respect to each of the various options that have been on the table here this morning. That said, I think we are thinking that an opt-out option would be available to those who wish to take it and who can afford to pay the costs associated with it.
Your Honor, similarly, in the context of the UCAN application, that was our understanding, so that's how we've been looking at it.
Okay, Mr. Guintivano.
Yes, and Your Honor, we want to we understand that a lot of these issues are preliminary, and we want to make it as open-ended as possible. What I'm referencing as far as even raising the health, privacy, security, and environmental issues of smart meters as it pertains to these workshops would be, it would be dependent on the cost information that would be presented and discussed by the parties in these workshops. In particular, I'm looking at an example where a particular individual would have a health concern towards smart meters, but then if an opt-out option would allow such an opt-out at a cost that cannot be afforded by this individual, then that would be an issue. to be discussed at the workshop. And really that's just one example that I could think of that may incorporate these health and other concerns, smart meters in these discussions at the workshops.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Martin.
Steve Martino. 2 points. First, on the question of having a reason, I would simply like to add that what one sees happening to other people and what one knows of the conditions that occur to other people would be a sufficient reason to be suspicious and to therefore wish to refuse the smart meter before having to undergo whether there are any adverse effects for oneself. It's the fact that this has become a very, very wide social issue that would be sufficient, I think, for anybody to say, hey, wait a minute, I don't need this. My second point is, I want to take issue with something that Mr. Wilner said about the condition of the utilities IT network and IT setup with respect to these meters. I'm particularly concerned with that a fairly large group of people whose analog meters have not yet been taken out, which remain, and therefore there has been no IT setup with respect to those meters. So from the PG&E's point of view, there would be nothing to retool, there would be nothing to reprogram with respect to those meters. Again, it would seem to me that there would be no cost to PG&E or to any of the utilities to leave a meter, an analog meter, in place. And so I think that it's up to them to provide some kind of detail as to what those costs might be for doing nothing. Whereas, of course, to replace a smart meter with an analog meter may take, like some cost.
Shonda Nwmu for PG&E, I'd just like to respond to that. I would just like to say that that is incorrect, that PG&E has not made modifications to its IT system. PG&E was authorized to deploy smart meter and smart meter technology multiple years ago. And consistent with that, PG&E has modified its IT system. It's on. Is that better? PG&E has modified its IT system to work with the smart meter automated technology. And so it is absolutely untrue that PG&E has not modified its system. And so to allow a non-smart meter option will take considerable cost and effort to make modifications to accommodate that.
My clients are disabled people who are, they become ill because of the smart meters operating in their homes and residences and near to them. And so what we would suggest is that those people have priority in having their smart meters removed. And if we're going to do a cost estimate, it should first estimate how many people exist who have these allergies or these electrosensitivities. And to do that, we would need some scientific review of existing literature. And we would like to bring that into the proceedings so that we can do an accurate estimate of the costs of the meters.
Well, I think that would also go into each individual IOU's proceeding applicable to each IOU.
We haven't seen any estimate of how many people have electrosensitivity. We'd like to have that included in order to do a cost estimate of how many people need to have their meters removed.
There is that is an issue that we do need to consider, but whether or not we consider it here, I don't think it's appropriate. We are looking at right now, from my understanding, the opt-out options would be available to that could be provided. We're looking at the options. When it comes down to priority or anything else, I think that is going to have to be considered in each individual utility's proceeding, because I doubt, although I may be wrong, I doubt that you could do a study that would be applicable to all three utilities. It may be different in each area. I don't know.
If it's a health impact.
Mr. Homec, you've raised an issue. It's not part of what we'll be looking at in costs right now. Right now, what I had asked was for the workshops, and I think there was some validity in saying, oh, we need to, let's look at the universe of proposals, and from the proposals, the parties can narrow it down and make more specific requests of what, and considerations of what are the costs associated.
Would that include the meter readers? If we have analog meters, then we would have to hire meter readers to go to each, or can we have some other creative way of
you can come up with whatever you believe is an appropriate proposal. I'm not limiting, but they should be reasonable. I hope you're not going to say, we should just, have your kids go and read it or something. I mean,
well, it'd be every 3 months instead of every 1 month.
Well, things like that. I mean, you can come up with your proposal as appropriate. Okay. Dr. Ross, you're not a party in this proceeding. I generally do not have non-parties speak during PHC.
Well, I thank you for your patience with us and our sort of unbridled enthusiasm. I have a question. Why can't we have two proposals? Why can't we have two options and the customers can decide between them?
That can be discussed at the workshop. Yeah, I'm not limiting to one. And it may be something that the utilities themselves may wish to consider is coming up with two. I'm not limiting that at this point. PG&E does have an application. They do have in their application their proposal, and that will be considered. We don't know what proposals Edison or San Diego may wish to submit. They may submit one, they may submit two. They may submit three, I don't know. But we'll consider them as they're sent, sent to us.
Is there any way that you can ask, PG&E has offered this last-in option for people to keep their analogs until this whole thing is settled. But unfortunately, there are reports of Wellington going out and replacing their meters anyway. Is there any way that you can encourage PG&E to honor the opt-out list or the delayed list?
Of course we honor it.
Okay.
Chondra Nwmu for PG&E. PG&E has a delay list. PG&E has made the number publicly available. PG&E Wellington installers are well aware of the delay list. So any customer, for any reason, can call PG&E's number and say that they want to be on the delay list. That's a fact. And we honor that request.
Mr. Tobin.
Your Honor, I'm speaking now in the PG&E opt-out proceeding on behalf of the clients I represent there.
Could you speak up,
Sorry. Is this better? On behalf of the clients I represent there, which I broadly characterize as a number of local government bodies, a large number of private citizens and citizens groups, and also people with environmental and human health interests, so it's a pretty broad spectrum of people. The first thing I'd like to say is I really fully support the starting process of the workshop, as long as it's clear that interested parties with alternative proposals to the PG&E plan, which in our protest we listed some of those alternatives, and we consider their continued deployment of additional smart meters to be an inherent component of their plan, because that's what they're doing as we speak, and that's what the people concerned about damage to human lives are talking about. So this is a pretty complex problem, because the problem is getting different as each day goes by. And there has been no honoring of local government ordinances requesting brief delays that typically run through December of this year, where these local governments could at least explore whether their normally applicable public safety and health reviews of construction projects, even of utilities like PG&E, comply with their ordinances. And PG&E has basically taken a position, I think publicly at the last pre-hearing conference, that these ordinances were of no legal consequence whatsoever. Now that is not the view of these local governments. and there's been no judicial or commission determination otherwise. So one part of their plan is to just keep rolling. And of course, the consequence of that is more people that feel like they're affected become affected by it as this goes on. Part of the reason we're having this hearing, unfortunately, I believe, is because these issues were never explored by the commission at an earlier time when you could probably persuasively argue they should have been. But it's a moving problem, and I don't see, if we don't start looking at what the conceptual alternatives are on a networking basis, a technical basis, etc., before we start getting bogged down in 40 volume cost studies, I think that would be a serious mistake and would be harmful to people. So what we would support would be a workshop that was called expeditiously but with enough time to get organized so that perhaps people could propose panels of experts on different areas. I'm not so sure that we can't find technologists, telecom specialists, economists that would be willing to give their views. And those could include, in my mind, some costing issues. For example, as we set out in the application concerning SoCal Edison, A110720, the County of Santa Barbara Board of Supervisors just voted that they thought that it should not be an opt-out, it should be an opt-in, in the sense that people shouldn't have to pay for this. It should be like, you want to save energy and get a new washing machine, we'll pay you $200 as an incentive. So there should be some kind of incentive-based structure. That doesn't get down to the level of detail of how many meter readers there are. That, I agree with you, excuse me, is the proper place to go in an individual rate application or other rate case of the utility involved. But perhaps it would be appropriate to look at some general rate structure questions that don't get this too bogged down. Because if we can't make progress out of the workshop and say, all right, these are the kind of technological alternatives that should be explored, I think it'll be next year sometime we'll be having the 19th pre-hearing conference. So I fully support what you're doing, and I hope we'll do it expeditiously.
Your Honor.
Yes.
Nwmu from PG&E. PG&E doesn't oppose workshops. We're just concerned about the effectiveness of the workshops. And in PG&E's proceeding, as you know, we've had a pre-hearing conference, and I would venture to say that almost all the issues, substantive issues that are being raised here today, have been raised before. After the pre-hearing conference, we had an assigned commissioner's ruling and scoping memo, and I'm concerned that at the workshop, if the workshop is open to lots of issues and talking about, there are issues that people clearly want to continue to talk about, although they've been scoped out of the proceeding. And I would like to understand how we're going to walk that balance, that we have a proceeding with a scoping memo, but we're going to have a joint workshop that's almost backward looking for us.
Okay. Yeah. I guess, Mr. Tobin, when you were talking about panels, I was a little concerned with, panels and technology. We're not, the technology for each utility has been selected. We're not doing a re-examination of the technology. As what we're looking at is, if a customer wishes to opt out of whatever smart meter has been selected, what are the options for opting out? What are you seeing as your panels providing?
Well, I don't mean to be overly formalistic, but the thought was, I think honestly, if you look at all the commission decisions, I don't think there's been any technological evaluation of PG&E's decision, for example, that using landline telephone lines was not feasible. As a matter of fact, that's an explicit issue that is supposed to be addressed in the smart grid deployment application plans that were filed by July 1 of this year. It's an explicit issue they're supposed to address. And as we indicated in yesterday's application, if that's an issue that still has to be addressed, it pretty much says it hasn't been. And I think the past decisions, I'll speak just by example with respect to SoCal Edison, were quite explicit that the recovery of expenses for specific infrastructure investments, like these particular transmitters and these particular forms of data networking were not considered reasonable until that had been explored. And they may never get a dime out of this. Who knows how it comes out. But I don't think the driver, I'm taking a position that's reflective of my client's views, I don't think the driver on what people should be entitled to do in this instance of this, and this is from a telecom perspective, it's almost statewide network serving millions of people that's cost billions of dollars to build. There's never been a CEQA review of any of it. There's never been a coastal zone review of any of it. And there's never been a commission review of the specific technology involved. It's astounding. It's astounding that this is happening. And I think that what the costs are, and the next question after that's determined is who's going to pay them. And my client's point of view is surely not the ratepayers. So there are a number of rate questions here: rate structure, rate levels, the amount of the alleged costs, what those are, and if we can't get the opt-out process, the reality of an opt-out and how it works and where it applies and when, who can do it, what do they have to do it, if we can't get that settled before all those questions are settled, this is going to be, it's all going to be like it sounds like San Diego's case is, 98% installed. And there's no reason for that to happen.
Your Honor, Michael Shames, the UCAN, based on some of the comments I've heard from many of the parties, I think it is incumbent upon you to consider a facilitated workshop, either by an ALJ or by yourself, which, by the way, is not unprecedented, because I'm beginning to fear that this workshop could devolve without that facilitation.
No, and I've been thinking about whether I would definitely, whatever the workshop was, I would definitely be there, whether I was going to be the facilitator or have staff facilitate. I hadn't really made any determinations yet. Yeah.
Maybe we could have more facilitators than participants, and that would facilitate.
Mr. Martino?
Yes, I have a question concerning an extended sense of opting out that is represented by the ordinances that a number of cities and counties have passed banning the installation of these smart meters. I don't know of anywhere where the Commission has actually presented an argument for why those ordinances are not legally legitimate and therefore binding on PG&E. And I would want to ask the Commission why they have not come out with some argument as to whether those ordinances are either legitimate or illegitimate, and if legitimate, why the Commission hasn't directed the utilities to obey them or recognize and follow them.
Yeah, I believe the Commission's General Counsel had sent a letter to the City of Fairfax concerning local ordinances with respect to installation of smart meters. And my understanding was that ALJ DeBerry had provided that to all the parties.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor. That Fairfax, Town of Fairfax is one of my clients.
Okay.
That letter was sent. That is not an action of the Commission.
No, it isn't an action of the Commission. That is the only thing that I'm aware of at this point.
And the only thing I would add to what Mr. Martino just said is that very request is part of the protest that we filed in this case. A request that the Commission issue such a ruling.
Okay, what I'd like to do is, before we had taken a break, I asked all of you to consider, workshops, structure, and I'd like to hear from all of you in terms of what you believe should be addressed, for the workshop in terms of single day, multiple days. I think the other thing I'd like to know is, to what extent parties will have a proposal that I should say the intervenors and the consumer groups would have a proposal that they would be submitting. So, Ms. Nwmu, why don't we start with you?
Sure. PG&E's position is that we're not opposed to the workshops. We are concerned about delay caused by multiple workshops and whether or not they are going to lead to anything that's going to be useful in the proceeding. I think that it'd be critical to have direction from Your Honor as to the specific scope of the workshop, what the roles will be, what's expected of the parties, and what's not in scope. And it may be useful to have parties have written presentations and potentially submit them in advance to allow other parties to know what's going to be presented and potentially to make it more efficient. From PG&E's perspective, we'd like to understand what you expect our role to be. Again, PG&E is an applicant, and PG&E has a proposal, so PG&E is happy to come to the workshop and present its proposal at the workshop, and that's what PG&E would plan to do. But we just think that it would be very important that it be a structured workshop, facilitated, and that people are very clear about what they are to address at the workshop. And the purpose of that would be that we could probably have, a month-long workshop if we don't get that direction. So that would be our position.
Okay, and just real quickly, in terms of what I envision the role of the utilities to be, I would like to have whoever is available, whoever is responsible for the smart meter, advanced meter deployment there who has participated in looking at the cost and the various options there to address any questions from parties. I would like to be as this really is an information exchange for everybody, so that we can look at what types of options are out there. In addition to PG&E's proposal, what are the other options that parties are thinking of, as being possibly considered? And it may be after the workshop and after discussion, it's determined, what I was thinking really isn't feasible. So PG&E, Edison, and San Diego, I envision your roles is helping supply a lot of the information. I don't want it to be a confrontational workshop at all. So all the information that is going to be elicited is to help develop, what options are out there, not to choose one option over the other or say that one option is better or worse at that point. It's just what are the options out there. Okay, Mr. Homec?
Yeah, this is Martin Homec for the San Diego territory people. And what we're interested in is making sure that the workshop discusses the costs. Is there a cost cap that you're going to be looking at so that some people could be excluded from participating? And if not, how many smart meters need to be implemented or operating in the service territory in order for the smart grid, which is a separate proceeding, in order for that smart grid to operate properly, so that we have some sort of overall threshold. Because if 30% of people opt out, then will the smart grid be affected?
Well, I think the question is if 30% of, if there's an option that's going to have such a huge opt-out, how do we, meet the Commission's objectives with respect to smart grid, and what are the impacts at that point? So I think all of you do need to keep that in mind as well. As there is an overall policy with the state for development of smart grid for various reasons, and what do the opt-out options, as each party is thinking of their own proposals, what would those options do with respect to the state policy? Okay, Ms. Morey, why don't we go with you next?
Okay. Your Honor, Candace Morey for DRA. I think that DRA would support having the goal of the workshop to be to come up with a limited universe of scenarios, to really flesh out what would be the limited universe of scenarios that then each utility could take and use as a starting point for providing additional cost information, either in supplemental testimony as DRA has requested, or more informally. But then that would be the starting point for other parties to respond. So how to get to that goal as a useful end product of the workshop? It may be useful to start with scenarios. I think Mr. Hawiger, saying that right? Described today. There is a limited universe of scenarios. I mean, we're looking at radio off option that PG&E has proposed. We're looking at analog meter option, whether it be for customers who still have their analog meter, or also in addition providing the option to revert to an analog meter. There's a question about whether that would be allowed on a citywide, community-wide basis, or if it's just individuals. And I think that that's a good starting point. Your Honor may, I think DRA would suggest that Your Honor allow the parties to submit, if they have any other additional proposals that they really think are significantly different from those, to submit them in advance of a workshop. Have Your Honor develop a workshop agenda that lays out what the basic proposals that will be discussed will be, and also allow opportunity for brainstorming and facilitating a dialogue of whether other creative solutions could come out of a workshop. But then be able to focus at the workshop on a discussion of what are the barriers, what do the utilities perceive to be the major drivers of increased cost or differential cost among the different options, so that all of the parties have a good kind of baseline understanding of what are the main moving parts. And then as a result of the workshop, issue an order or directive for the utilities to further flesh out the options that seem to emerge from a facilitated workshop. And I think that would be a useful structure. I don't know if you wanted to add anything. Our analyst is here. Okay.
Your Honor, Michael Shames with UCAN. In order to expedite this, I'm going to generally agree with what's been suggested by both PG&E and by DRA. Your direction will be useful. I like specifically the idea of any intervenor submitting to you and other parties their specific proposals. UCAN has a set. You can develop the scope of what will be discussed at that workshop, what will not, distill it down. Parties will have an advance notice, the utilities will have advance notice, and I think that would make for the most constructive workshop.
Jim Tobin, I would support Mr. Shames and DRA.
SDGD would support the proposals by DRA and Mr. Shames.
I'm Martin Homec, and I guess I have to go for the disabled people being the first people who are able to opt out. If there's going to be a cap on the number of opt-out ratepayers allowed.
The proposal sounds fine to the ecological options. No, thank you.
Sandi, Maurer, EMR Safety Network. Appreciate the inclusion of the discussion of the retention or restoration of analog meters. Support the workshop.
I'm Weil for Aglet. I have two specific issues of concern. First of all, I support the idea that there would be a moderator or a facilitator. That leads to the question of whether or not there would be a workshop report. It's been my experience that workshop reports tend to take a lot of time, and I would hope that a report's not necessary given that the parties are going to be preparing testimony after the workshop.
No, I wasn't planning on there being a workshop report unless the parties felt that that was necessary. What I will make sure to do for the workshop, and that may limit where we have it, is have it available either via webcast or WebEx. I'm not quite sure exactly how the WebEx works, but that should retain the actual workshop for purposes of anybody who wishes to go back and review, what had been said during the workshop.
My second point concerns the sequencing of the workshop and additional discovery efforts. I believe that if the purpose of the workshop is limited to the development of scenarios that will be subject to future cost-related discovery, that would add a lot of time to the proceeding, and I don't think that would be useful. So I would hope that the parties would be able to conduct discovery on their scenarios before the workshops, so that when the workshop started, we had actual information at hand rather than develop scenarios absent that kind of information. And in order to expedite some of that, I would ask that you instruct the parties who will be conducting discovery on scenarios to serve those discovery requests on the service list.
Okay, and I think that is a good idea. I mean, in terms of the costs, I don't want the parties, if you're going to be proposing an analog opt-out, to ask utilities, okay, well, what if it's I want 2%, I'm assuming 2% will opt out, and somebody else says, I assume 5% will opt out. I would like to not burden the utilities with running multiple cost estimates of very similar, opt-out options. So, with that respect, I'm not opposed to having discovery and having the parties, request that the utilities provide cost information, but they need to be reasonable. They can't just be all over the place. And we do need a limited universe of, what do you assume would be happening if a certain type of option is offered.
I think that's reasonable, but I would raise the point that we have completion rates for the three major utilities that are way far apart. So I think we should allow the discovery to be utility specific in terms of both rollout percentage to date and someone's estimate of the take rate by people opting out.
Steve Martino, Alameda County residents. We propose strongly that analog meter opt-out be considered in this workshop. Whatever that will take, as a means of prioritizing the needs of those people who have been adversely affected in terms of their health and well-being by these meters. We propose that humans take priority over business in this matter. And in that sense, what we want to add, since it was brought up that suppose 30% of the people of California decide that they want to opt out of a smart meter, what will happen to the smart grid? I think that we would have to consider that as a vote against the smart grid. That the smart grid's virtue and value cannot simply be assumed by any political body in this state without that proviso that if a sufficient number of people decide that they are against it, it then is canceled. Now, on that basis, I want to return to my constitutional argument that if a smart meter presents a danger or a lack of safety to a property owner under the Constitution, they have the right to refuse in terms of their property protections.
I'm sorry, Mr. Martino, this is part of your application in a separate proceeding, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, I am not going to be addressing what is in your separate application.
No, that's fine.
In this proceeding. So in terms of, you know, just what the workshop is going to do, how it's going to be structured, that's all I'm looking for right now.
Right.
Okay, and
so,
do you have anything to say with that?
Yes. My punchline to what I was about to say is that there is an opt-in option that needs, I think, to be considered, and on that score, I'm adding my voice to what Mr. Tobin had represented from those bodies that he's representing.
And
so
you're planning to propose that?
Those are our proposals to this workshop.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wilner.
David Wilner, Wilner & Associates. I said welcome aboard at the beginning of the hearing. I'm going to repeat that. We appreciate having you here, your patience. Obviously, there's different points of view. I'm in favor of the workshop. I hope, as part of that you'll put out a ruling and identify the options that we should consider. I think there's only a few. The wireless, the smart meter without the transmitter is one. Number two, an analog meter is number two. And if there's a number three, perhaps because the parties are here today, they can tell you what that would be. If you have a list of three or four options, that gives us a starting point for the workshop to address those. Talking about numbers of potential subscribers that would want to opt out, PG&E did do a study, and they've indicated 180,000 of their subscribers may choose to opt out. I think that's a good touchstone. PG&E does know how many customers it has, and it has done a survey. That number might be adjusted through further discovery, but I think that's a good starting point for PG&E. When we filed a protest in this matter, the crux of our protest was, if you disconnect the transmitter and the smart meter, will that give relief to people with health issues? And if it won't, if the Commission decides to have that as the option, then in essence, and there's a cost attached to it, then in essence, subscribers that don't get relief would be asked to pay for something that doesn't benefit them. That raises a serious question under 451 of the Public Utilities Code, which I'm sure you're familiar with. We represent people that suffer from electrical sensitivity. We go out in the field and we work with them. These are people that didn't have a smart meter, their life was okay. The smart meter gets installed and their life is turned upside down. This is not a scientific study that I'm talking about. This is hands-on in the field, visiting people's homes, looking at their environment with spectrum analyzers, oscilloscopes, and what have you. They really are desperately ill. I have clients that sleep in a tent in the backyard because they can't sleep in the house because of a smart meter. To me, that is extremely upsetting, and I feel obligated to point that out to you and to include that in the workshop. If the meter without a transmitter doesn't give relief, they have to have an option. We can't leave these people stranded out there with these terrible health concerns. So what do we do if we don't have the analog meter as an option? So somehow we have to weave that into the workshop, hopefully, and take that into consideration. Now I filed several motions here. One motion was for a study to be conducted by PG&E, and this is an empirical study where we would go to a customer's house, or PG&E would go to the customer's house with DRA supervision and disconnect the smart meter to see if that relieved their symptoms. And if it did, I think there would be clear cut, and that would be a customer that requires an analog meter. And that would be a customer under the Americans with Disability Act that's entitled to such an accommodation. and that would be a customer that would be entitled to that accommodation without charge under the Public Utilities Code section 453B. So this is where we came into the proceeding. This thing, of course, is expanding out, but that's the essence of our participation. We want relief for people that have health concerns. We appreciate that there has to be a cost study, there has to be a cost recovery mechanism and all of that, but if we don't give relief to people, then why are we spending all this time in this proceeding? So I'm in favor of the workshop or workshops. I'm in favor of you giving us a schematic to follow, so to speak, in terms of options. I'm in favor of getting some cost information from the utilities. Thank you.
Ms. Combs, do you have?
Your Honor, I think we generally support the workshop that would look to trying to determine the limited options that we should be considering further. And certainly in terms of costs, we would have potentially preliminary information to share, but of course it would be nothing more than that. We'd have to make assumptions about, take-up rates and things like that. But I think we could be prepared to do some very basic conceptual working with the parties on those issues.
Okay, and Mr. Hawiger, do you have anything to add?
Just one question. Is the issue of the cost recovery mechanism at all an issue for these workshops?
I would prefer not to have that at the workshops at this point. I think for each utility, we will look at cost recovery. I think there may be some overlapping issues in terms of care. I believe PG&E had proposed in its application a different rate structure for care as opposed to non-care customers, and we may want to discuss that just in general. And in terms of also, who is responsible? How will the cost be recovered? Who will they be recovered from? Just the customers opting out, or will it be more socialized? And I think those are general questions. We may want to consider them, but I would prefer not to consider them at this workshop. I think we can discuss them at a later date. Mr. Weil.
Your Honor, along those lines, I don't think there's any dispute that the rate at which customers will opt out depends on cost.
Yes.
So to the extent that you're going to exclude cost recovery mechanisms from the workshop, could I ask at least that the utilities, when they produce estimates, or if they produce estimates of the percentages of customers that will opt out, include their assumptions regarding costs, so that we can get a sense of of how those assumptions fit in depending on eventual cost recovery mechanisms.
Okay. Would you be able to do that?
For PG&E, we've done that in our application testimony.
For just the radio law, but if there are other options, would you be able to do it for other options? Just even a rough estimate?
Can you give me a second?
Okay. Mr. Trial?
I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood. Are we referring to the cost of the customer or the cost of the customer program? I'm not sure what you're asking for us to present.
In terms of costs for the customers. Yeah.
We can give preliminary figures for cost to the customers. I thought the question was whether the cost recovery mechanisms from the effects to the overall program would be addressed. And I thought they would be excluded.
No, that will be excluded. I was referring to Mr. Weil's question, and did I get that correct? It's the cost for the customers themselves?
Yes, which follows the assumption of whether the costs are going to be recovered by all ratepayers or the individuals that are opting out.
We've got some preliminary estimates of, for, to the individual customers. I think we will, if we go, I believe, the state of Maine had said it was individual customers. Why don't we follow that assumption that individual customers opting out would be responsible? And if you can follow that, yes, Ms. Morey.
Your Honor, I just want to point out that in the state of Maine, state of Maine's decision, there were certain aspects of opt-out costs that the state determined should in fact be socialized. For example, I believe with respect to communications, and outreach, and also I think that, just not having looked at it recently with respect to some of the IT workaround costs. So I think that it's important to not prejudge every single element of costs, and I think one of the goals that DRA would like to see coming out of the workshop is a better understanding of what's driving costs and how it might be appropriate to then structure rate-making proposals. So, to give the parties the tools, essentially, to be able to make educated decisions.
Well, we can't have it both ways. I mean, that's what it boils down to. If you would like to have some preliminary estimates of, rates and the cost impacts on individual customers who wish to opt out, there's going to have to be certain assumptions made, and we're not going to be sitting there requiring detailed information from the utilities of, what costs do you feel are going to be socialized. I mean, we just can't have that if you're going to be looking at, a preliminary estimate at this point.
I guess I'm a little confused then about what the purpose of the workshop is. And DRA recommended that it be to develop what the scenarios would be, and that would then be further subjected to cost fleshing out. And some parties had mentioned the issue of delay. We actually circulated a proposed schedule last night that would have a workshop take place on August 18th, which was the initial date PG&E had suggested. And so for that, obviously I think it'd be very difficult for the utilities to come up with costs per customer, but rather have the workshop focus, as I believe you were initially suggesting, on, well, what would the options be, and get a sense of what are the big pieces within those options that are going to impact costs. But then allow the utilities some time to prepare testimony or supplemental testimony that would flesh out the costs for a limited set of opt-out proposals. So I guess, DRA doesn't think that, I think we believe it would be premature to try to come to a workshop with all of the costs. That there should first be a workshop to discuss the different options and what should be subjected to additional testimony explaining what the costs would be.
Okay, Mr. Hawiger.
Thank you, Your Honor. I guess sorry, I'm a little bit late on the uptake here. I have two comments regarding the workshop. I have to slightly disagree with my colleagues. I do think that I would hope that the workshops would allow us to discuss the different options, discuss the technical ramifications on the smart grid system of the different options, and discuss the cost drivers associated with each option, and so that utilities could provide us with an explanation of what they see as the potential costs associated with different options, the cost drivers, not necessarily quantifying them, but the drivers for different options. And I would hope that we can do that at the workshop. I don't necessarily, I think the utilities could actually give us some numbers at the workshop, and I would hope that'd be possible. But I don't want to just, I don't want to discuss ad nauseum what are the different options. I think we have some established that to some extent. And I would also say I don't want the workshops to devolve into a discussion of the different health effects. I think I hear what Mr. Wilner stated. I think that we can put that aside and discuss an option being analog only, analog for some large area that may resolve those issues. But we shouldn't discuss why that should be the right one or why another option is the wrong one. I'd like to get all the options on the table and get as much detailed cost and technical engineering information about the feasibility of different options and what they would entail. And with that, I think that would make it useful. And are we going to have a separate conversation about scheduling, or should I give you my 2 cents on the scheduling at this point?
Scheduling for?
At the workshop.
At the workshop. Go ahead.
I would just suggest, I know that our technical expert, August 17th and 18th, is on the stand in another proceeding, has hearings, and so I would actually would prefer not to have it those 2 dates, and have it either the following week or better yet even wait after Edison rate case hearings are done on August 26th. Thank you.
Yes. Sandi, Maurer, EMR Safety Network. I want to make a comment about what's happening in the state of Maine. Yes, they did finalize that opt-out for for ratepayers, and they've asked them to pay a monthly fee. And I do know that this is being challenged at consumer advocates. They are challenging this fee. And I believe if there is a cost to be borne for the solution, it should be socialized.
Okay.
And then I want to finalize one other point is that the Colorado Public Utilities Commission has just authorized an opt-in program because they are very aware of the growing concerns about the radio frequencies. Thank you.
All right. What I'd like to do at this point is ask.
You wanted me to get back to you?
Go ahead.
Nwmu. So I wanted to talk with the Smart Meter Program Director, and so we would be able to put some very preliminary rough estimates. We don't have data or customer surveys, so it would be very rough. We'd be able to do that. And then also, just to follow up on the scheduling point for the workshop, we did have the same date proposed as DRA for a proposed workshop, but at that time we were envisioning that we would be working consistent with the scoping memo and that we would be solely proposing radio off. So we will need additional time because these are to work up cost estimates on these other options will take us additional time. So I just wanted to make that note.
Okay, and that is the question I have for the three utilities is, what type of timing are you looking for as, in terms of preparation for a workshop?
Well, given the stage that we're in, I believe possibly the beginning of September would be more appropriate to ask PG&E because we're behind the curve.
Right. And I know, Ms. Combs, do you have any idea, if we were to push to the beginning of September and give you approximately a month, would Edison be able to come up with some of these proposals at that point?
Yes, I mean, that would work well from a timing standpoint, I think, for us to participate in the workshop again. I mean, we're not going to be advancing a proposal. Right. We're prepared to talk about what's feasible in terms of options from our standpoint at this point in time, cost drivers, technical barriers that we see. I think it is very fair topics for us to explore at the workshop.
Just one more point. I think that a scoping memo describing exactly what we've come to agreement here would be helpful in preparing for the workshops.
Yes.
The sooner that can get out would help us.
Okay, and what I will be asking all of you is that if by the close of business tomorrow, if all parties who plan to submit a proposal at the workshop, if you can email that to me, copy the entire service list, so that everyone can see what types of options are out there. I can then summarize it in a scoping memo, and that will give the guidance of what will be considered at the workshop. I will consider also, I think and I can't remember who had mentioned this, that an outline of what exactly will be discussed by each party submitting a proposal be submitted also to everyone so that we know what's going on and what's going to be discussed. So hopefully, I don't need that outline now. I'll put that in a ruling for the workshop, but at least by close of business tomorrow, though, if there are any other proposals other than radio off, an analog meter, either on a individual or on a community basis. Let me see if I have any others. And also, whether there's I don't know, Mr. Wilner, if you're planning, or Mr. Tobin, the opt-in proposal.
Yes, please.
Okay. Anything other than those three, please get them to me so that I can look at them and put them all into a ruling. Okay. Yes.
By the close of business tomorrow, DRA could certainly put forth a conceptual idea of one beyond the three that you've mentioned.
Okay.
But there are multiple facets of that will be developed over time. So
that's fine.
Okay.
All I need is just generally what is going to be proposed, so that we have direction for everyone on what is going to be considered and discussed at the workshop. Okay, and I will look for dates for the workshop, and you know, I am going to hopefully, I don't know if it will work to have it in here, but this room as well as the auditorium are the only two that have the webcasting capability, and I know that we can also do WebEx so that parties who would want to just call in and attend telephonically could submit information via computer. So, you know, I'd like to give that opportunity as well. Okay?
Your Honor,
yes.
Real quickly, just to confirm, telephonic appearances would be acceptable at workshop?
Yes, they will be. I will make sure that there is access for people who cannot attend in person. Yes.
But Your Honor, when we submit this proposal to you, do we need to include the entire service list?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Your Honor, just two questions. Do you contemplate a third pre-hearing conference after the workshops?
I'm going to think about it. I'm not sure at this point.
Okay. And my second question is, do you contemplate consolidating these various applications into one?
I haven't given it any consideration at this point. I think they're all on different schedules, it may not be appropriate to do that because that does end up delaying one application versus the other. And I know that there were discussions before about the differences in the technology and the deployment rates. That may also be a driver on why we don't consolidate, but I do need to give it some thought. I haven't really done any thinking of that at this point.
Thank you.
Okay. PG&E, we're supposed to meet afterwards to discuss the schedule for the, I shouldn't say PG&E, but those in application 1103-014. We're going to go off the record now, and then we can discuss what we want to do. So why don't we go off the record at this point? Meet any further to discuss PG&E's application schedule. Ms. Nwmu, go ahead.
Chondra Nwmu for PG&E. So I was looking at my calendar, but one of the concerns I wanted to express is that PG&E does have, as you said, the utilities are in different positions, but PG&E does have an application in, and we do have a scoping memo, and we had proposed a schedule that would continue along the procedural path with testimony and hearings. And the concern is that holding this off until workshops and having a third pre-hearing conference will significantly delay resolution of our proceedings. So we would like to get some sense of the schedule. It's a delicate balance because I think that we need to have the workshop. Now that you've scheduled a joint workshop, I understand that that needs to be an intervening date that we didn't have on our schedule.
Okay. In terms of the timing, if I were to look at the dates that you have for intervenor testimony, what you had originally proposed was approximately 2 weeks after whatever workshop was held. Yes, Ms. Morey.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Honor, but I think part of what the schedule will depend on is coming out of the workshop, whether, or coming out as a result of DRA's motion that we filed on Friday, whether PG&E would be required to file some supplemental testimony or even more informally provide a further fleshed out estimate of costs. So I think that needs to be something that's considered and not just jump to intervenor testimony if that is something Your Honor is willing to provide for within this whole proceeding.
Okay. Let me think of how I want to do this. I think I may end up having to schedule another PHC just to discuss the schedule for filing testimony and briefs and also for hearings. I will do that when I set up the workshop. I'll also set another date for PG&E at that point. For Edison and for San Diego, I think those, a subsequent pre-hearing conference will need to be determined once any type of proposal is developed by the utilities or there's, and I think at that point also we'll have Edison's protest. I'm assuming you'll be protesting, Ms. Combs, to the application and any other protests or replies that might be filed. So I think that'll be a better sense for whichever ALJ has your application to go forward at that point. Mr. Trial for San Diego, we will schedule another pre-hearing conference, I think, to go over scope, but we can discuss that, maybe at the end of the workshops with the parties to find out, how San Diego is progressing to determine the appropriate time to do that. Okay? So are there any other matters at this point? Okay, thank you all very, very much. I know it's been